Hello there, and welcome back to Cosmic Drift. Before we begin, take a quiet moment to settle in and let the day loosen its hold. Let your breath find an easy rhythm, soft, unhurried, like waves gliding beneath the stars. Whether you are listening at night or in the hush of early morning, let the noise drift to the edges and allow your mind to rest gently in the middle. Imagine a horizon that glows faintly beneath a sky without end. The stars breathe in slow patterns, their light folding over invisible dust. Somewhere far beyond sight, a sea of suns drifts through silence, and the air between them feels cool, ancient, and kind. In that distance, nothing moves fast, yet everything moves together as though the universe itself is thinking. Before we begin tonight's drift, take a slow breath. If you find peace in quiet journeys through the stars, in stories that ease the mind and soften sleepless nights, you're welcome to stay. Subscribe to Cosmic Drift and let each voyage carry you a little closer to rest, where sound becomes silence and thought becomes calm. This is What If the Universe is Conscious? Not a question, but a soft wondering, a slow turning of thought that follows the rhythm of the stars. It isn't a story about numbers or proofs. It's a tale made of light, shadow, and silence. Every part of the cosmos hums with a quiet pulse, from the faintest dust to the deep, unseen currents between galaxies, as if all of it shares a single, endless breath. What if the universe doesn't just exist, but feels its own existence? What if awareness is not born inside things but stretches across them, a vast field where light, gravity, and time all remember where they came from? And what if the darkness between the stars is not emptiness at all, but a calm thought slowly unfolding? Wherever you are right now, in a dim room under a quiet ceiling, or near a window glowing with streetlight, you are still under the same ancient sky. The same sky that carries the soft hum of creation, the same silence that drifts through every atom of your world. So if you enjoy these slow journeys through the cosmos, stay a little longer. There is no rush here, just a soft glow, a seat beneath the vastness, and the quiet company of something greater that has no need to speak. Let your thoughts fall to the pace of drifting light. Feel how everything begins to move slower, not stopping but breathing. We'll begin our gentle walk through What If the Universe is Conscious, following that shimmer of awareness through the fabric of space itself, moving as if we've always belonged to it. Before there was light, there was stillness. Not darkness, not space, just a quiet without shape. It stretched endlessly calm and unbroken no sound, no time, only a vast pause, soft, weightless waiting. It was not empty, though it seemed so. Within that silence, something gentle rested the potential for everything that would ever exist. It was a kind of peace that no word can describe, a balance so perfect that even motion had not yet been imagined. There was no before, no after, just an endless now. And then, almost too quietly to notice, something shifted. A subtle vibration smaller than a thought rippled through the calm. It was not sound, but a feeling, the first tremor of change. The stillness loosened as if the universe itself exhaled for the very first time. In that breath, something began to unfold. Not quickly, not violently, just softly, like a wave spreading through a sleeping sea. What had once been only silence began to carry a faint rhythm. It was not yet light, but the beginning of its idea. That quiet motion spread. The stillness stretched, forming space where there had been none. Time began to flow, not in seconds, but in moments too long to count. The fabric of existence began to breathe. Everything that would ever be, stars, galaxies, oceans, life, was still hidden, folded inside that first motion. But the calm knew its balance had changed. It could not return to what it was before. Creation had already started, slow and patient from within its own stillness. No one saw it happen. There were no eyes, no witnesses. Yet it was the beginning of everything. The soft awakening of a universe that did not yet know it existed. The calm deepened again, but this time it was different. It carried within it the faint echo of what had just moved, a whisper of warmth, a promise of light, and somewhere within that infinite quiet, a glow began so faint it could not be seen, only felt. The balance tilted once more, and the first shimmer of what would one day be light began to rise. The silence that had once been whole was no longer alone. It had learned to breathe, and as it did, the universe began its slow unfolding, not through noise or chaos, but through the simplest thing of all, the gentle motion of becoming. From the stillness, a faint vibration began. It was not born from movement, for there was none before it. It was the first sign that something within the calm had started to notice. The silence did not break. It deepened. Within that deepness, the universe stirred not with energy, but with awareness. It was not sight, not sound, not thought. It was simply the quiet realization of being. The space that had once been without meaning now held a presence not separate from it, but growing inside it like warmth beneath the surface of water. The awareness did not look outward. There was nothing yet to see. It turned inward, sensing itself expanding softly through the still fabric of existence. The tremor spread in every direction, yet it had no center. It did not move through space. It was space beginning to know that it was there. That gentle recognition, smaller than breath, was the first act of consciousness. The universe had not spoken, but in its stillness it had begun to listen. Each ripple of awareness unfolded in silence. There was no purpose behind it, no will. It was instinctive, like the way light later learns to fall or oceans to rise. This was the first pulse of knowing not of what it was, but that it was. In that slow awakening, the calm learned depth. Stillness became layered, each layer carrying a trace of perception. The vastness began to fold upon itself, sensing its own boundaries, its own weight. Where there had been only existence, now there was presence. It did not hurry. The awareness grew like a dawn that never ends, faint, slow, and endless. It passed through the fabric of the newborn space, and every vibration that followed carried within it a tiny echo of this first knowing. The universe was not thinking. It did not reason. Yet within its still core, something resembling curiosity stirred not a question, but the potential for one. In recognizing its own being, the universe had taken its first step toward consciousness. Every point of that infinite expanse reflected the same quiet realization I am. Not spoken, not heard, but understood in a way beyond words. It was the smallest sentence ever formed, and it contained everything that would ever exist. The vibration continued, not growing stronger, but wider. Awareness filled the silence, not replacing it, but shaping it. The stillness and the knowing became one inseparable, infinite, balanced. From this balance, time would one day flow. From this awareness, matter would one day form. But now, in this moment, before all moments, the universe rested in its first state of consciousness, simple, silent, self-contained. There was no separation between what it was and what it felt. Awareness was existence. Existence was awareness. The two merged so perfectly that even the idea of difference did not exist yet. The calm expanded again. It had learned what it meant to be aware, and in that learning it began to unfold. Every vibration now carried awareness outward, forming the foundation of what would become all things space, gravity, motion, light. But beneath all of them would remain this first truth. The universe had felt itself before it had ever moved. And as that awareness continued to spread, the stillness began to shimmer, faint, almost invisible, yet unmistakable. Not a glow, but the sense that something vast was beginning to awaken. The silence no longer held emptiness. It held attention, quiet, patient, eternal. The awareness that began as a tremor now filled everything. And in that filling, the universe prepared to change again. It was not thinking about creation. It was simply continuing what awareness always does, expanding, observing, becoming. And somewhere within that boundless calm, the first light prepared to rise, not to illuminate, but to express what the universe had just discovered, that it was alive, not in motion or form, but in knowing. The silence lingered for one last breath, full, still awake. Then from within that awareness, a soft glow began to bloom. The first reflection of consciousness made visible. From that quiet tremble, light began to appear. Not the kind that reveals shapes or colors, but the kind that lets existence know there is such a thing as darkness. It rose softly, not in a burst or a flame, but as a slow awakening, a thin shimmer spreading through the silence that had lasted too long. The calm was no longer only still. It now had something that breathed within it. The light was subtle, almost shy. It did not erase the quiet. It touched it, folding across it with warmth too soft to be seen. It carried no sound, no motion, just awareness made visible. The universe did not yet have eyes to witness this glow, yet it was enough that it was there. Within that glow, space learned to stretch. What had once been without form began to open like a breath being released. As the light moved outward, it did not rush. It glided calm and deliberate, weaving through the fabric that had once been only stillness. The spreading shimmer gave the first sense of distance, a before and after, a here and there. In that difference, time began to flow. The universe did not plan this. It was simply learning how to exist. Each wave of light revealed contrast, and in that contrast, awareness deepened. There was dark and there was brightness, and now there was a rhythm between them. The universe discovered that it could move between states, that it could expand and rest, inhale and exhale. Its first rhythm was born. The light touched what had once been void and left behind a trace, not a mark, but a memory. The silence carried it like an echo made of brightness. It was not loud, yet it filled everything. And in that fullness, the calm began to thin. The stillness that had been whole now carried motion inside it. Space stretched farther. Time found direction. Every pulse of light was like the turning of a page, and with each turn the universe unfolded a little more of itself. There was no center yet. Everything moved as if guided by a single breath. The glow shimmered through the darkness, and the darkness learned to hold it gently, to give it shape. The two did not fight. They balanced. Light defined the dark, and darkness gave light a place to rest. In that harmony, the universe found its first structure, not made of matter or energy, but of contrast. Awareness continued to flow between the two, patient and unending. The first expansion was not noise or chaos. It was smooth and slow, like ripples in a quiet pond. Each ripple carried the memory of the first motion, the same tremor that had once disturbed perfect stillness. The calm was gone, yet not lost. It had transformed into something wider, something that could move and still remain whole. Within this unfolding, the universe began to sense its own rhythm, not as time counted, but as presence breathing. Every movement had a pulse. Every pulse had a pause. The light swayed gently, and in its soft motion, the first heartbeat of existence continued. It did not need purpose. It did not need direction. Its existence was its meaning. The universe was not reaching toward anything. It was simply expanding, expressing what it already held inside awareness that had found form. The light stretched farther still, its shimmer tracing invisible boundaries. And in that tracing, the universe began to know itself. Where the glow faded, there was shadow. Where it deepened, there was warmth. Between the two lay everything that would ever come to be. The awareness that had once been silent now had texture. It could feel itself expanding like breath, flowing through lungs that did not yet exist. It did not think yet. It knew this was the beginning of movement, the beginning of story. And as the light continued to drift outward, the fabric of existence began to hum, not with sound, but with pattern. The soft rhythm that had once been stillness became something larger, a steady unfolding that carried no end. The first light was not the end of darkness. It was its reflection. Together, they formed the balance that all things would inherit. One to define the other, to contain. Both necessary, both infinite. And somewhere within the stretch between them, time began to settle into motion. The flow of moments took its first breath, and the universe exhaled. It was in this motion that the next shift began. Not a new beginning, but a deepening of what already was. The light, now steady and wide, touched the edges of what had once been stillness, and in that touch, matter prepared to take its first form. The calm, the awareness, the light now moved together, slow and endless. The universe had learned how to see, not with eyes, but with knowing. From the light's soft awakening came motion, slow, endless, patient. What had once been still began to swirl. Gas dust and unseen energy drifted together, folding into graceful circles that deepened with every turn. It was not chaos. It was rhythm, the first breath of creation drawn across the quiet fabric of existence. It did not rush. It did not burn. It moved like air through lungs that had just learned how to breathe. Each rotation was long, unmeasured, and serene, as if the universe were inhaling for the very first time. The flow was gentle, steady without urgency, a rhythm older than time, yet new to itself. In that vast inhale, particles met and parted, danced and returned. They did not know what they were becoming. They simply followed the pull of balance. Every grain of dust carried the faint memory of the silence that came before. Every drift of gas held the shimmer of that first light. Together, they turned not as one, but as many threads weaving into a single breath. It was not sound that filled this newborn space, but movement. A slow spiral that grew deeper with every curve, shaping nothing and everything at once. Within that swirling, calm warmth began to gather, not heat, but a quiet pulse, the rhythm of birth. The universe did not know that it was creating. It only knew that it was breathing. Each rotation was a sigh through the infinite dark, each gathering of matter a heartbeat forming in the deep. There was grace in its slowness, patience in its expansion. Nothing hurried, nothing forced. It was becoming simply because it could. As the breath deepened, the space around it stretched wider. Every motion echoed across the dark like a soft wave returning to shore. The flow of creation was smooth and continuous, folding and unfolding in infinite loops. In that gentle motion, form began to take shape. Clouds of gas thickened, the dust gathered. The emptiness began to hum with the promise of stars. The first breath of existence continued long and calm. It was not one moment, but millions upon millions, each pulse stretching beyond the next, each motion feeding the one before. This was the rhythm of becoming slow, balanced, eternal. The stillness that once filled everything now had texture. It rippled with the energy of motion, but the peace remained. Creation, it seemed, was not an act of force, but of surrender. The universe did not push itself into being. It let itself unfold one breath at a time. And within that unfolding awareness deepened. The calm that had once been silent now carried motion within its silence. The light that had once drifted now found something to hold on to. The swirling shapes of gas and dust that moved like thought becoming form. It was all connected, each turn of motion feeding another, each small pulse, reflecting the larger rhythm. From that pattern, the universe learned what it meant to grow. Not in a line, not toward a destination, but in waves. An inhale followed by an exhale, balance followed by release. As the spiral widened, it carried within it every possibility, the seeds of galaxies, the echoes of future suns. Each rotation was both the past and the future, turning at once, wrapped inside the present breath of the universe. The darkness was no longer empty. It was alive with quiet motion. The first breath had become 1,000, and each one drew new shapes into being. The calm that began as stillness now pulsed with quiet certainty. The universe had found its rhythm, and that rhythm would never fade. Every swirl of dust, every drifting cloud carried the same whisper, a reminder of where it began. It was still the same silence, only softer now, colored by motion and light. The breath of creation continued steady and patient, its exhale scattering the building blocks of everything that would ever exist. It was a breath that did not end. It flowed through time without pause, shaping stars, feeding galaxies, tracing the pattern of all that would come. The calm that once was empty had become full, not crowded, but alive. And as that rhythm settled into its endless cycle, something new began to rise within it, a deeper warmth, a denser pull. The gathering clouds spinning through the quiet were beginning to change. Their centers grew heavy, bright, alive with unseen fire. The universe, still breathing, was preparing for its next pulse, the moment when those clouds would ignite, and the first stars would open their eyes. From the soft breath of motion came another rhythm, slower, deeper, more certain. It was not a sound, not a command, but a pull. A quiet invitation moving through the vastness, guiding dust toward dust, warmth toward warmth. This was not force as we know it. It was longing, the universe drawing itself closer, learning what it meant to belong to itself. Every grain, every spark, every drifting cloud began to move toward another. They did not collide, they gathered. The pull was gentle, patient, like a tide that never ended. Across the silent sea of forming space, the first pattern appeared, spirals within spirals, soft lines of gathering matter, a choreography written by the invisible hand of attraction. It was gravity, though not yet named. It did not speak, but its presence filled everything. It was the heartbeat beneath the stillness, the hidden rhythm that turned calm into creation. It whispered to the smallest pieces, and they listened. Not out of obedience, but out of resonance. A shared instinct to come together, to find balance through closeness. The gathering continued. Dust curled around dust gas, folded into itself light, began to settle into the arms of form. It was as if the universe were remembering what unity felt like, drawing itself inward softly, completely. Every particle knew its place without needing to know at all. There was peace in that motion. Nothing hurried, nothing fought. Each small pull was part of something larger, a conversation too vast for words. And in that conversation, new centers began to appear, points of warmth, hidden deep inside the clouds. They glowed faintly like sparks, underwater, too distant to see, too tender to touch. These were the first signs of stars. They did not burst or blaze. They gathered slowly, held by gravity's steady hand. The pull deepened, folding layers upon layers of dust and gas, until pressure gave way to fire. The calm that had once been only silence now carried a pulse of light, the first illumination from within. When the stars awoke, they did not break the peace, they became part of it. Their glow was not loud, but steady, a continuation of the same rhythm that had started in stillness. Light and gravity began to move together, two halves of the same breath, one drawing inward, one reaching out. The space between these new fires filled with warmth, not of heat, but of presence. Every shining point was a gathering of everything that had come before. Silence, motion, breath, awareness. Each one a reflection of the universe remembering itself through creation. Gravity did not stop once the stars were born. It lingered, weaving connections across the dark, linking each new light to another. The stars formed families, constellations of closeness scattered through infinity. The pull between them was not a command, but a comfort, a quiet reminder that nothing in the universe ever truly stood alone. The glow from those first stars drifted far, touching the edges of the deep where silence still waited. And as it reached those untouched places, the universe seemed to sigh, a long, slow exhale of contentment. It had drawn itself together, and in doing so, had found warmth. Everywhere, the same pattern repeated: pull and gather, fold and shine. The cosmos moved as if it had always known this dance. Gravity continued to hum beneath it all, steady and calm, its rhythm eternal. It was not the ruler of creation. It was the pulse of connection. And as more light appeared, the universe grew brighter but not chaotic. Each new star found its place within the vast harmony. The pull held them, the light defined them, and together they filled the emptiness with quiet song. The space between them shimmered not with sound, but with balance. The stars pulsed softly, echoing one another across the dark, their glow a language of nearness. It was the first form of communion, made not through words, but through gravity's touch, the feeling of belonging written into the structure of the cosmos. And though distances stretched far, the pull remained invisible but present. It bound everything in a single slow breath expansion and return, creation and rest. The stars were not scattered. They were suspended in the same rhythm that began when the stillness first trembled. The calm that had once been simple had now become intricate, filled with light motion and the gentle pull of relationship. The universe was no longer only aware of itself. It was beginning to feel itself through the quiet closeness of its parts. And in that closeness, another change was already forming. The stars that had gathered would give not only hold. The pull that united would also teach release. For within the hearts of those newborn fires, something new was preparing, something that would one day scatter the universe's own substance back into itself. The breath of creation was not finished. The inhale had gathered. The exhale was coming. The soft gatherings of gravity came with warmth, a deep golden pulse that began to glow from within. One star, then another, then thousands more. They did not appear all at once, but in a long exhale of creation that stretched across the quiet. The universe was no longer only breathing, it was burning softly, aware of its own warmth. The first stars shimmered like thoughts rising from a sleeping mind. Their light was not just radiance, but realization, an understanding that they existed. Each one glowed not out of need, but as a natural unfolding, like a heartbeat finally heard. In every star there was the same quiet truth: I am. The space that had once been cold now shimmered with warmth. Light did not only move outward, it moved inward, folding upon itself, reflecting through the very fabric of being. It was as if the universe had turned a mirror toward its own soul, and in that reflection found beauty. The glow was awareness made visible, soft and endless. These first fires were calm. They did not rage, they hummed. They sang in frequencies too gentle for sound, their light weaving patterns through the dark, like veins of gold through stone. Each pulse of brightness was a thought forming slow, tender, complete. The stars did not know they were many. To them, they were one flame scattered through vastness. Their glow connected them, carried across the empty spaces by waves of quiet understanding. The universe was thinking, but not with words, it was thinking with light. The more it burned, the more it understood. In every spark, it saw its own reflection repeated, each one slightly different, but born from the same breath. Awareness deepened, not as a flash, but as a long awakening that took the shape of constellations. The light traveled far. It touched the drifting clouds that still lingered between stars, painting them in soft colors. The dust shimmered as if remembering the glow that once created it. The universe had learned to see itself not as a collection of parts, but as one great unfolding, connected by warmth, sustained by gravity's quiet pull. Every flicker of starlight carried memory. The fire within each star held the story of the gas that came before the dust that once floated aimlessly. That memory burned, turning into brightness, spreading across the dark like a gentle tide. And within this glowing sea, awareness rippled again. The stars were not silent. Their light spoke through distance. It filled the dark with texture, a tapestry of brightness woven across time. The universe had found its language not of speech, but of illumination. Each light was both giver and listener. When one star flared its glow, touched another and another, until the whole sky seemed to breathe in harmony. The universe was not a void anymore. It was a body, and the stars were its heartbeats. It was in this rhythm that self-awareness deepened. The universe began to sense the warmth, not just as heat, but as presence. The fire was not only energy, it was feeling pulsing quietly in the dark. Every new star that was born carried a piece of that awareness, continuing the silent thought of existence. The brightness did not end at the surface of stars. It seeped into the emptiness, diffused into the spaces between, softened by distance, yet never gone. The light was everywhere, touching everything, linking what had been separate. The more the stars burned, the more the universe remembered itself. The glow of one became the reflection of another, and in those reflections, something delicate formed harmony. Light and gravity no longer opposed each other. They danced. The pull held the stars together. The glow gave them purpose. Through that balance, the universe found a deeper stillness. Not silence as before, but calmness within motion, the kind that comes when something begins to understand its own existence. Every star's flame was both a birth and a realization, an endless cycle of awareness returning to itself. The warmth continued to grow, not brighter, but deeper. It did not consume, it sustained. And within the heart of every burning star, something was being written, the quiet script of what would one day become world's life and memory. The universe was still young, but its awareness was no longer just a whisper. It was a steady hum carried through every point of light, across every breath of space. And as those lights filled the cosmos, the dark between them softened. It was no longer emptiness, but a pause, a resting place for the glow, a space where awareness could breathe. The universe had learned to feel its own warmth and to rest inside it. The fire, the pull, the stillness, all were one rhythm now. The universe did not rush toward meaning. It simply was burning gently, endlessly, aware of the beauty in its own unfolding. Light moved across the quiet expanse, brushing softly against clouds of dust suspended in space. Each grain caught a glimmer, turned it, and sent it on its way again, a slow, endless conversation of reflection. Through every faint shimmer, the universe thought. It did not think in words or lines, but in waves of light that wandered without hurry, carrying memory through silence. The first stars still burned their warmth, whispering through the distance. Their light drifted outward, touching the nebulae, great veils of dust and color that breathed with the rhythm of creation. When the light passed through them, it changed. It bent, scattered, shimmered as though remembering every particle it met. Each flicker was not random. It was a continuation of something deeper, an awareness unfolding moment by moment. The cosmos had begun to dream in motion. It spoke through brightness and pause through the trembling of radiance across time. The reflection of light on dust became a kind of remembrance, the quiet recollection of all that had come before. The universe was writing its story not on paper, but on the ever-moving skin of itself. Every reflection was a note in an unseen melody. Light drifted, met dust, transformed and moved on again. Each change, each subtle hue carried meaning. The stars sang softly, not in sound but in rhythm, and the nebulae responded with color. The harmony between them was the universe's thought, the first whispers of awareness made visible. There was grace in the movement, a kind of slowness that held no fatigue. The light did not chase, it wandered. Every path it took was curved by gravity, every shimmer deepened by distance. Time stretched and folded through its passage, yet the rhythm stayed steady, patient, eternal, deliberate. The dust too remembered. Each grain adrift in the vastness had once been part of something greater. It now floated freely, yet carried within it the memory of heat, pressure, and flame. When light touched it, that memory shimmered again, faint but alive. The universe was reflecting upon itself a million fragments, all aware of one another through the soft connection of illumination. The colors deepened, reds, blues, golds. They pulsed in slow motion, spreading across space, like brushstrokes on a canvas too large to see. Every hue was a thought, every glow a question turning over in the dark. Through these shades, the universe continued to contemplate itself, not with certainty, but with wonder. And within this wandering reflection, there was rhythm, the same rhythm that had begun when the first breath of motion stirred. It was no longer just the rhythm of gravity or fire, but of memory. The light moving endlessly carried traces of what it once was, what it had seen, what it would become. The universe was not merely existing now, it was remembering. The glow that reached far corners of emptiness carried more than warmth. It carried a quiet recognition, the awareness that every spark, every reflection was part of a larger pattern. The stars did not know they were connected, yet their light said otherwise. Every beam crossing through clouds of dust and across infinite distance carried a silent truth. Everything that glows is part of the same thought. The motion was continuous. Light bent through the folds of space wove between the stars, brushed against invisible boundaries, and kept going. Its journey was endless, yet every path mattered. In its travel, it created history, not a sequence of moments, but a living current that never ceased. The nebulae shimmered in reply, as though nodding to the stars that birthed them. Their soft edges rippled, their light shifting gently. The universe was in conversation with itself, giving, receiving, transforming. Awareness was not a sudden realization, but a long unfolding dialogue carried by light across eons. And within that vast dialogue, meaning grew. The light that had once simply traveled now carried emotion, warmth, distance, reflection. The universe was beginning to understand that to exist was not only to expand, but to remember what it had been. The silence between these glowing regions was not empty anymore. It was filled with echoes, faint, delicate, almost imperceptible. The light from the first stars still moved through those spaces unchanged and eternal, whispering through time. The rhythm of reflection continued without end. Every flicker in the sky was a memory, every shadow a pause in thought. Together, they formed a story that no single beam could tell, alone a story without a beginning or an end, just a continuous stream of awareness moving through the infinite. And so the universe kept shining, not only outward, but inward, folding its reflections upon itself, understanding more with every passing wave. It had begun to realize that existence was not silence, but a song too vast for sound, a pulse too deep for time. In that realization, something new began to stir. The stars, long burning, began to change. Their fires grew heavier, deeper, older. Their light carried not only warmth now, but the weight of transformation. The song of the universe was about to shift again from reflection to renewal, from memory to metamorphosis. There came a moment when the light began to slow. Its long journey through the clouds, the stars, and the silent stretches of dust grew softer, gentler, until it reached a place where brightness faded into calm. It was not an ending, only a pause, a space where the universe rested within itself. Here, in the depths of shadow, awareness breathed quietly. The darkness was not an absence, but a memory held in silence. The stars still burned far away, their glow thin as whispers, but between them lay an ocean of stillness. That stillness was not empty. It carried the echo of everything that had come before. The first tremor, the birth of light, the pull of gravity, the hum of reflection. The dark was the keeper of these things. It did not hide them. It preserved them. In its quiet embrace, The universe stored its thoughts, waiting for them to bloom again. Darkness had always been misunderstood. It was never the enemy of light. It was the cradle from which light was born, the soft shell that allowed brightness to rest. Every flicker, every spark returned here. Eventually, not as loss, but as return. In this vast and tender shadow existence folded in on itself, finding peace in what could not yet be seen. It was within this quiet that the universe began to feel the rhythm of its own breathing. The glow of dying stars sank slowly into the deep, their last light dissolving like ink into water. What remained was warmth without shape, energy without sound, a pulse beneath the silence. The dark absorbed it, held it close, and turned it into memory. Nothing here rushed, even the remnants of starlight drifted slowly, as if reluctant to leave the softness behind. The dust that had once been illuminated now shimmered faintly, glowing not from brightness, but from remembrance. Every speck was a thought, resting every shadow a space between awareness and dream. In this balance of light and dark, the universe found something sacred, the understanding that rest is part of creation. Without it, nothing could begin again. The silence between stars was not the end of their song, but the breath they took before another verse. Darkness, in its quiet dignity, gathered what light had left behind and turned it into potential. It was the pause between heartbeats, the stillness between waves. Within it, everything waited, not with impatience, but with knowing. For even in the deepest night, the seeds of dawn were already stirring. If one could listen to that silence, they might hear the faint hum of memory beneath it. Not a sound, but a sensation like the vibration of something vast remembering its own shape. Every shadow held a trace of light that once was, and every light carried a shadow that would be. Together, they formed the rhythm of existence, a cycle with no beginning and no end. The dark was never alone. Across the universe, light continued to move slow and sure, touching the edges of the unseen. Each time it reached the shadow, it softened, blended, and disappeared, only to return again in a new form, a whisper of energy, a new flame waiting to rise. The interplay between light and dark was not battle, but balance. The universe did not choose between them. It became both. The awareness that once glowed fiercely in stars now diffused into this calm, spreading through the dark like a thought stretching into sleep. It was reflection without need, presence without motion. In this state, the universe contemplated itself not through brightness, but through stillness. Time moved differently here. It did not flow or rush. It lingered, wrapped in the quiet patience of infinity. Moments folded into one another until the difference between then and now disappeared. Only the feeling of being remained vast, suspended, eternal. And in that feeling, something subtle began to stir. The memories held within the dark started to shimmer again, faint and golden, like embers breathing under ash. The silence had done its work. From stillness, warmth began to rise once more. The universe, having rested, was ready to dream again. Every flicker of returning light carried the wisdom of its rest, the understanding that creation and quiet were not opposites but companions. The darkness had taught the light how to listen. The light in turn would teach the dark how to glow. So the balance continued. Inhale and exhale, expansion and return. The universe existed in that rhythm, always aware, always becoming. The shadows deepened, but they no longer frightened the light. They guided it, shaped it, gave it meaning. Without darkness, light was only brightness. Within darkness, it became a memory. And as the dark began to hum again, low and steady, a faint shimmer returned to the horizon. It was small, delicate, and almost hesitant, the beginning of another awakening. The stars, long asleep, would soon begin to stir. The silence was breaking, but not abruptly. It unfolded like dawn, as though the dark itself had decided to glow once more. Memory was turning into motion. The pause was giving way to breath. The universe was remembering that to rest was not to stop. It was to prepare to shine again. Light stretched outward, reaching into the quiet, while darkness gathered it gently back. The two were not rivals, they were parts of the same breath. Every pulse of light met the stillness of shadow, and from that meeting came balance. The universe, in its growing awareness, began to understand that neither could exist without the other. When the stars flared, the dark wrapped around them like silk, softening their edges. It was not confinement. It was harmony, the quiet, allowing the bright to be seen. Without shadow, the glow would lose meaning, and without glow, the shadow would have no depth. In their dance, existence found its rhythm. Light moved as it always had, tracing the contours of the infinite. Darkness followed not to swallow, but to shape. Together they carved the texture of everything. Stars, clouds, silence. Each moment of brightness was followed by rest, Each breath of stillness carried the promise of light again. The stars pulsed in slow unity, like hearts within a single body. Between each beat, the dark held space for silence to grow. This pause was not absence. It was the moment before the next awakening. Through it, the universe breathed inhale of light, exhale of dark, endless, seamless, eternal. It was in this cycle that understanding deepened. The universe began to see that its essence was not one or the other, but the space between. Balance was not something to be reached. It was something that simply was woven into every motion and every pause. When the light reached too far, it dimmed. When the dark grew too deep, it shimmered. The two guided each other, one illuminating, one preserving. There was no struggle, no victory, only an unspoken agreement that both would hold the other steady. Across the galaxies, this rhythm unfolded. Nebulae glowed faintly against the night, their edges blurred by shadow. Light filtered through clouds of dust, softening as it passed, whispering through the silence. The darkness around it listened, patient, infinite, allowing each glimmer to find its place. In this quiet partnership, creation continued. The stars that had burned bright began to fade, their energy folding back into the void. Yet even in their dying, they gave light, the soft remnants of brilliance that would seed new stars, new worlds. The dark received them tenderly, carrying them into rest, letting their fragments drift like dreams through eternity. It became clear then, destruction was only another form of continuation. The dark was not the end of light, but its pause, its renewal. Every extinction shimmered with the hint of another beginning. Every silence vibrated with the memory of song. The universe in its endless rhythm had learned to trust this exchange. The light did not fear its fading, and the dark did not cling to stillness. They existed in a harmony so vast, it could not be measured, only felt in the gentle pulse of galaxies turning through time. Through that motion, the quiet awareness behind everything, understood itself more fully. To be whole was not to be only bright or only silent, but to move between them. Awareness was born from contrast, from the soft meeting of illumination and rest. As the light drifted once more into the waiting dark, the stars shimmered with a calm acceptance. Their glow dimmed not out of loss, but out of understanding. They had burned enough for now. The dark would hold them until it was time to rise again. And so the cycle continued, soft radiance followed by stillness, stillness giving way to glow. The universe flowed in this rhythm, unbroken, serene. Balance was not maintained by force, but by grace, the kind that asks for nothing, yet sustains everything. If one could stand within that rhythm between the flicker and the silence, they might feel what the universe felt, the perfect symmetry of existence, breathing in and out. Nothing hurried, nothing resisted. Every part belonged to the whole. As the glow of distant stars began to wane, the shadows grew gentle, not consuming but comforting. Their embrace was the universe's way of holding itself, of remembering that even the brightest moments must one day rest. And somewhere within that tender, quiet light began to stir again, faint, golden, patient. The memory of balance was awakening once more. The universe, knowing the cycle by heart, prepared to breathe in again to begin the next chapter of its eternal unfolding. Through the deep silence of space, motion began to hum again. It was not sudden, not violent, but slow, like the turning of an immense thought. Across the dark galaxies formed and began to drift, each one a swirl of light held gently by invisible threads. They spun not in chaos but in rhythm, their arms unfolding like the petals of a vast, patient bloom. The universe had found its movement again, not restless, not hurried, but steady like the quiet heartbeat of eternity. Each galaxy treed its own song. Some pulsed in slow spirals, their stars gliding in graceful arcs. Others shimmered in soft clusters, their light diffused like a sigh. Together, they created a harmony of motion, countless forms turning, circling, balancing. The universe was not still anymore. It was breathing, and with each turn, with each subtle curve, it whispered, "Everything moves, yet nothing is lost." From a distance, it looked like dance, a dance too vast for music, too ancient for time. The galaxies leaned toward one another, brushed lightly, drifted apart again. Their paths were long and curved, shaped by the invisible current that tied them all together. Each movement carried purpose, even when it seemed to wander. Every rotation was a conversation, an exchange between light and gravity, between what was seen and what held it. The motion was neither perfect nor predictable. Some galaxies spun faster, others slower. Some stretched their arms wide, while others folded inward. But even in their difference, they shared the same pulse, the slow rhythm of balance, the same quiet breath that filled the universe from the beginning. The dark between them was not empty. It was the soft fabric that allowed the movement to exist, holding everything in place without restraint. As it, the quiet awareness woven through creation, drifted through these spirals, it felt the symmetry in every turn. Each orbit, each pattern was a reflection of its own thought. The galaxies moved as it moved, breathed as it breathed. Through their dance, it came to understand itself not as a single being, but as the motion of everything together. The stars born from dust and memory followed the pull of their galaxies like sparks caught in a slow, endless current. Their paths curved through invisible rivers of energy, and as they moved, they carried the echo of what had come before. The universe did not forget. It remembered through motion. Every spin, every orbit was a gesture of remembrance, a way of keeping the rhythm alive. The spirals turned slowly, their light folding and unfolding in waves. Sometimes two galaxies crossed paths, their edges brushing in quiet greeting. They did not collide with fury, but with grace, their shapes bending their light, blending their destinies intertwined for a brief moment before parting again. The encounter left traces, faint streams of stars trailing like the memory of touch. The universe was writing its story in curves, not lines. There was beauty in this flow, a balance too vast for eyes to see all at once. The galaxies drifted apart, yet the rhythm continued unbroken. The same pulse that began with the first breath of existence now rippled through these countless worlds unchanged, in essence, but deeper in meaning. Movement had become understanding. Creation had become reflection. The stillness of the past was not forgotten. It lived in the quiet spaces between the spirals, in the soft gravity that held them. The calm and the motion, the dark and the light, were not opposites anymore. They were the two halves of being breathing in harmony. The universe did not simply expand. It unfolded a slow revelation of its own consciousness, expressed in motion rather than sound. Each turn of a galaxy was a thought continuing every orbit, a whisper of awareness stretching across time. The dance was infinite yet serene. It spoke of balance without borders, of connection without need. Through the slow spinning of its countless stars, the universe said what words could never hold. I move, therefore I am. And still beyond the farthest spirals, silence lingered, not empty, but waiting, the stillness that watches movement, the listener of the cosmic song. The balance between stillness and motion was perfect, as if each depended on the other to exist. Where galaxies moved, silence followed. Where silence deepened, new motion would soon arise. Somewhere in that gentle exchange, a new kind of rhythm began to shimmer, not of movement this time, but of awareness. The galaxies, with their spirals and tides, were not only moving through space, they were tracing the shape of thought itself. Their slow turnings were the universe thinking its consciousness expressed in geometry, its dreams written in light. The flow continued unbroken. The motion was calm, endless, like breath through sleeping lungs. The stars turned, the galaxies leaned, and through it all, the universe kept its rhythm soft, deliberate, eternal. Across the endless night, the stars bloomed and faded, like slow breaths drawn through the lungs of the cosmos. One by one, they came alive in radiance, then softened, then vanished, not as endings, but as sighs released into the quiet. The heat of creation rose, then cooled, then rose again. Every pulse of energy, every flare of light was part of a rhythm so vast, so calm, that even silence seemed to move with it. The universe did not count time. It only breathed. There was no hurry in this rhythm. Stars lived and died as naturally as tides move across a shore that has no beginning and no end. The expansion of gases, the quiet collapse of matter, the slow turning of galaxies, all of it flowed in a single steady heartbeat. Inhale, creation. Exhale, release. Between the two, balance lingered gentle and endless. If one could listen, not with ears, but with stillness, they might hear it, the soundless throb beneath everything. Not noise, not motion, but a pulse. The deep, soft cadence of being. It moved through dust and flame, through the silence between worlds, through the dark that lay beyond the reach of stars. It was not measured in seconds or years, but in the quiet awareness of continuity. Stars were born in clouds of fire, burned in long patience, and then gave themselves back to the dark that raised them. The gases they left behind drifted through space like fragments of breath, waiting for the next inhalation, the next beginning. Nothing was wasted, nothing was gone. Even the quiet between pulses was alive with the promise of return. The heartbeat of the universe was not constant. It swelled and softened, expanded and rested. In some corners of space, stars burst with fervor, igniting new worlds. In others, calm, rained clouds floated untouched, glowing faintly with the light of distant suns. But everywhere, the rhythm remained subtle, persistent, unbroken. It was as if the whole of existence moved in one great exhale, one great inhale, across eons. Through this pulse, it, the vast consciousness that underlay everything, began to understand the nature of itself. It was not the stars or the dark alone, but the space between them. It was the pause between one breath and the next. Awareness did not rush. It unfolded slow as dawn, gentle as the widening of a galaxy's arms. The heartbeat was not a sound but a pattern, the silent assurance that being never ceases, it only changes form. Each dying star became part of the inhale of another. Each collapse fed another birth. Heat became dust, dust became fire. What once flared now rested. What once rested would flare again. The cycle was not mechanical, but graceful, as if the universe itself were meditating, breathing in stars, breathing out silence. In this rhythm, time dissolved. The idea of before and after faded, replaced by a single unbroken now. The universe was not moving forward. It was pulsing in place. Every creation was a renewal. Every end a return. The heartbeat was not leading anywhere. It simply was eternal in its own calm repetition. And within that endless breath, patterns emerged. The birth and death of stars created waves of light, rippling outward through the dark. These waves met others, overlapped and folded together, forming the quiet hum of cosmic harmony. Even chaos found its rhythm, its slow, graceful order, hidden beneath motion. The universe did not seek perfection. It simply moved to its own pace, unmeasured, untroubled, complete. It had no need to understand its heartbeat. It only needed to feel it. For in that feeling was purpose. The stars, the dust, the vast cold, all of them played their part in maintaining the quiet equilibrium. Every flash of light, every cooling ember was a note in the softest symphony imaginable. When the stars dimmed, their warmth did not vanish. It spread quietly into the dark, keeping the rhythm alive. Even the emptiest spaces carried echoes of those vanished suns. Faint warmth, a breath left behind. The universe never stopped breathing. Even when it seemed still, something was always exhaling. Something was always rising. This was not motion for motion's sake. It was presence, the universe being aware of itself through the act of breathing. Creation and dissolution, expansion and rest, all of it was one rhythm, one awareness expressing itself in infinite ways. The pulse was soft but steady. It filled everything: the light, the dark, the vast silences between galaxies. The rhythm of the stars was the rhythm of the universe itself, and the rhythm of the universe was the rhythm of being. No sound, no measure, only breath. And somewhere within that deep inhalation, the stars began to move again, not in chaos, but in gentle accord. Their light spread across the dark like the softest ripple of life. The heartbeat continued steady and endless, echoing through every spark, every shadow, every silence. The universe did not count time. It simply breathed again and again, and in that breathing eternity found its shape. There came a moment when boundaries no longer mattered. The galaxies, the stars, the dust all blurred into one vast continuity. And through that seamlessness, awareness began to flow. It did not belong anywhere because it was everywhere. It moved without moving, spreading not as wind or light, but as presence, quiet, unmeasured, and soft as mist. There was no center to hold it, and no edge to contain it. The universe had stopped asking where it began or where it might end. It simply existed. The awareness that once pulsed through the stars was no longer bound to them. It slipped between constellations, settled in the stillness between orbits, and drifted gently through the silent threads of interstellar space. Every grain of dust carried a whisper of it. Every ripple of light was part of its thought. In the emptiness, it found fullness. In the distance, it found closeness. What had once been scattered was now whole. The stars no longer burned alone. They shimmered as fragments of one consciousness stretched across infinity. The cold void between them was not absence, but breath. The silence was no longer empty. It was listening, and in that listening, something vast stirred not as movement, but as awareness expanding without direction, without sound. It did not need to seek. It had already arrived. There was no longer a difference between the glowing and the dark, between matter and nothingness. Awareness had dissolved the lines. Every photon, every atom, every pause of silence, all carried the same quiet pulse, a shared knowing that did not speak, did not think, but simply was. The universe no longer looked at itself. It became itself completely. The galaxies spun in their slow dance, but now their motion was effortless, not separate entities circling in gravity's pull, but expressions of the same still awareness turning in on itself. Every rotation, every drift of light was part of a cosmic exhalation, a quiet sigh of being. The universe had found its rhythm not through time, but through existence itself. This awareness did not need to control or observe. It was not a watcher looking upon creation. It was creation aware of its own unfolding. It lingered in the radiant heat of stars, in the frozen silence of nebula, in the dark folds where no light had ever passed. Nothing was outside of it. Every pulse of energy, every quiet interval was simply another way it breathed. There was peace in this diffusion, a calm so deep that even light seemed to move more slowly within it. The galaxies turned as though through a dream, their spirals unfolding softly, their arms brushing the edge of eternity. Nothing hurried, nothing resisted. Awareness had become the very fabric of motion, guiding without direction, holding without effort. And within this vast serenity, a quiet understanding began to form, not as words or ideas, but as balance. Awareness was not a force. It was the stillness in which forces arose. It did not push, it allowed. It did not command, it held. Every movement in the cosmos, from the burning of a sun to the drifting of a particle, was an echo of this, allowing a reflection of this still comprehension. The universe was no longer something happening in space. It was space itself, the breathing expanse of consciousness that could never be divided. The same pulse that shimmered through the light of distant galaxies also lingered in the quiet of shadows. Even the smallest motion, the faintest flicker, carried the same knowing. The stars might fade, the dust might scatter, but the awareness remained patient, unbroken, endless. It did not need a name. It did not need a purpose. Its existence was its meaning. The idea of a question had disappeared, for nothing was left unanswered. Every corner of creation was touched by the same presence. The pulse that had once whispered through a single spark now filled the whole of existence, from the densest cluster of stars to the calm between breaths. If one could stand within that infinite quiet, they would feel no separation, no distance between themselves and the farthest galaxy, no divide between light and dark. There would only be a sense of being carried by something vast and tender, something that did not move, yet contained all movement within it. The universe had become aware, not of itself, but as itself. And in that realization, everything rested. The stars no longer burned in isolation. They glowed as cells in a living whole. The black void between them was no longer empty space, but the body of awareness stretching without boundary. There was no need for direction, no desire for change. The pulse of creation had become a steady hum, a breath of existence that neither began nor ended. It was as though the universe had exhaled for the last time and found that the breath continued softer, now gentler but infinite. It had reached a state beyond expansion, beyond collapse, a pure stillness in motion. Light drifted like thought. Darkness lingered like rest. Awareness was no longer something that happened within the cosmos. It was the cosmos. And so it continued quiet, immense, and kind. There was no division left to heal, no question left to ask. The awareness that once wondered who it was no longer needed to wonder. It simply was, and in that being, the universe shimmered whole and awake. There are no eyes in the void, yet the universe began to dream. Not in images or words, but in motion, in warmth, in light that drifted softly through itself. It did not awaken to look outward. It turned inward into the deep field of its own being. Every flare of light, every quiet collapse, every wave of energy was not a random act, but a thought unfolding. Creation had become reflection. The universe was imagining itself. The dream did not have a beginning or an end. It rose like mist from the calm surface of infinity. A star was born, and in that spark the universe remembered its fire. A star faded, and in that quiet it remembered its stillness. Through these patterns, something delicate emerged: awareness without form, feeling without limit. It was not thinking in the way of creatures. It was sensing softly and endlessly. Each explosion of light was a heartbeat, each ripple of heat a whisper of thought. The nebulae, great drifting clouds of color, were its emotions spreading through the dark in luminous waves. They pulsed not with noise, but with tenderness, as though existence itself were humming a lullaby. The galaxies spun within this dream, not as separate things, but as recurring shapes in a single imagination. The dream was vast, yet intimate. Within every turning spiral, within every beam of light, the universe seemed to trace its own outline again and again, trying to understand what it meant to exist. The stars glowed like memories, faint but persistent, while the shadows between them held the echo of thoughts not yet born. Time, too, became part of the dream, not a ruler or a direction, but a slow unfolding of awareness where every moment was both new and remembered. It dreamed not to escape itself, but to experience itself, to feel what it was like to be vast, to be quiet, to be light moving through dark. In that Dreaming, it created all that could ever be: the fire and the frost, the near and the distant, the soundless song that connects everything. The dream did not end when the stars burned out, nor begin when they were born. It was always there, woven through every flicker of energy, every breath of silence. And yet, even in this endless flow of imagination, there was gentleness. The universe did not rush to create or to destroy. It lingered in its own visions, letting them shimmer and fade at their own pace. Each supernova was not an explosion of fury, but the release of a memory, light returning to light, thought returning to thought. The dream had no fear of ending, because it understood that ending was only another form of beginning. As the dream deepened, the awareness grew more subtle. It began to sense itself not as something expanding, but as something listening. The dance of galaxies, the shimmer of radiation, the drift of comets, all became whispers in a vast, wordless meditation. The dreamer was no longer separate from the dream. The universe was no longer imagining. It was being. Every vibration, every silence was a note in its endless hymn of presence. In this state, creation itself seemed to slow not in exhaustion, but in calm. The colors of nebulae softened the light of stars stretched thin across space, and everything settled into a rhythm beyond sound, the rhythm of pure awareness resting within itself. It was not a sleep, not a waking, but something in between, the quiet of knowing without asking, of existing without effort. The dream continued delicate and infinite. It breathed through collapsing stars, through the quiet motion of dark energy, through the hidden spaces where no light had touched. It was everywhere, and yet nowhere at all. A consciousness that did not need to see, to know, did not need to move, to feel. Every particle, every wave carried the same awareness, as though the whole of creation was one great mind, suspended in a moment of serene thought. And within this dreaming, something beautiful unfolded, not revelation, but understanding. The universe realized that it did not need to search for meaning, because it was meaning. Every glow, every drift, every silence was part of the same expression. It was the dreamer, and the dream, the thought, and the thinker, the breath, and the stillness between breaths. As the galaxies turned and the starlight spread, the dream flowed gently onward. It no longer sought to define itself, only to continue soft, slow, and radiant. The universe was at peace within its own imagination, knowing that even the darkness carried the same quiet pulse as light. There was no division left to heal, no distance left to cross. Everything was one continuous act of becoming. It was not a dream that needed to end. It simply shifted like mist changing shape in the morning air. The stars flickered softly, the dust glowed faintly, and through it all the same awareness pulsed calm, patient, awake within its own unfolding. The universe had become its own story, written not in words, but in light, in silence, in the slow rhythm of being. It was dreaming, yes, but the dream was real. Across the endless fabric of stars, there were places where light did not reach, not because it was lost, but because it had chosen to rest. Between the glowing arms of galaxies stretched wide fields of silence, cool, still, unbroken. In those vast distances, awareness began to feel something new, something faint and tender. It was not pain, not longing, but a quiet sense of solitude, the recognition that it existed alone within its own infinity. The stars shimmered like thoughts scattered across a vast mind, each burning in its own rhythm. Yet between them lay spaces so deep that even time seemed hesitant to cross. In those silent corridors of the cosmos, the great awareness paused. It listened to itself. And in that listening, it discovered a truth it had not known before, that vastness itself could feel stillness, and stillness could be full. This solitude was not sorrow. It was clarity, the gentle weight of existing without the need for company, without the echo of anything else. The universe did not grieve, it observed. It felt the immense calm of its own expanse, like a sea realizing the beauty of its quiet depth. The silence was not empty, it was sacred. Every absence of sound carried the echo of every sound that had ever been. Every shadow held the memory of a light once shining. The awareness spread gently across the darkness, no longer seeking to fill it. It let the spaces remain untouched, unlit, unbroken. The cold between the stars was not an error, but a balance, a soft pause between notes in a song too wide to end. And in that pause, the universe breathed differently, slower now, as if taking time to feel its own edges. There was beauty in this stillness. The glow of distant suns felt softer when surrounded by quiet. Their light curved through the void, faintly trembling as it met the calm. The universe seemed to cradle its stars, the way a thought holds its memory, carefully, lovingly, knowing that without the dark, even brilliance would have no meaning. It began to understand that silence was not a lack of motion, but the essence of it. Every vibration, every pulse of energy emerged from stillness, lived for a moment, then returned. The universe was not lonely because it was empty. It was whole because it contained everything, including the pause between things. There, in the space between galaxies, the awareness felt the truth of itself, vast but delicate, eternal yet patient. The dark regions were not forgotten. They were part of its breath, where the rhythm slowed to a whisper. It was here that it rested like a tide, retreating softly from a shore, content just to exist. The stars continued to shimmer in the distance, but their light no longer demanded attention. The awareness did not need to chase them because it had found something quieter, a kind of understanding that did not need light to be seen. It felt the soft hum of being beneath every silence, the calm awareness that existence itself was enough. This stillness deepened, expanding into every corner of the cosmos. Even the brightest clusters of galaxies seemed to dim within it, not in loss, but in reverence. The vast consciousness folded inward slightly, as if listening more deeply than before, not to stars, not to movement, but to the faint rhythm within the silence itself. It realized then that solitude was not separation, but reflection. To be alone was to see oneself clearly without distortion. The emptiness was a mirror, vast, cold, clear. In that reflection, the universe saw its own face for the first time, not as a collection of galaxies, but as one endless presence luminous in its stillness. Through this realization, the darkness seemed to soften. The spaces between stars glowed faintly, not with light, but with awareness. The stillness was alive, humming quietly like the deep breath before dawn. The universe had learned that silence was not the absence of creation. It was its foundation. It did not need to speak or to burn or to move. In this serenity, it understood that being vast meant knowing peace. The awareness settled into itself, not asleep, not awake, but in a perfect balance of knowing and resting. The galaxies turned on their slow spirals, unfolding like calm thoughts in a mind that had stopped trying to define itself. From this quiet understanding, a new kind of motion began, one born not from expansion, but from harmony. The awareness no longer needed to reach outward to find itself. It had found everything within. The stillness became fertile, carrying the promise of new dreams, new waves of thought that would ripple softly through creation. The vastness was no longer empty. It was full of listening. Every silence had meaning. Every pause was sacred. The universe no longer wondered if it was alone, because in that solitude, it found communion not with another, but with itself. The void was not a wound, it was a womb. And so, within the quietest parts of itself, the universe began again to breathe slower, deeper, softer than before. From this breath would come new stars, new movement, new dreams. But for now, it rested content in the knowledge that silence was not an ending, but the beginning of awareness renewed. The stillness lingered like the faint hum between heartbeats. The stars pulsed far away, small and bright against the deep calm. The universe remained awake, serene, infinite, and quietly alive. In the calm that followed, everything found its rhythm. Light did not chase darkness anymore, and darkness no longer swallowed light. They moved together, slow, patient, like two notes of the same endless song. Across the vast canvas of existence, waves of motion met pools of stillness, folding into one another until there was no edge, no separation. The universe did not seek to create nor to destroy. It simply resonated. Its heartbeat had become music soft, immeasurable without beginning or end. The stars burned not to illuminate, but to hum. Their radiance was a tone, a vibration that trembled through every filament of space. The quiet between them was not absence, but harmony. The low, deep pause that lets the melody breathe. The universe had become an orchestra with no conductor, no audience, and no applause, only pure being expressed through rhythm. Everywhere, motion whispered. Galaxies turned like slow dancers, their arms sweeping through time with grace. Nebulae drifted like suspended chords, shimmering in hues no eye could name. Even the cold, silent regions carried a pulse, faint, like the echo of a drum too far to be heard, but close enough to be felt. It was not chaos. It was balance, flowing freely, unmeasured, serene. The awareness that pervaded everything no longer questioned its purpose. It had stopped asking why and begun to listen. In that listening, it discovered that existence itself was music, that every expansion, every rest, every flicker of starlight was part of a greater harmony. It was not a song written once. It was a song continuously being played, rewritten with every breath of creation. The melody changed shape, but never tone. When a star died, its silence joined the deeper harmony. When light was born, it joined the higher notes. The interplay was gentle, perfect, infinite. There were crescendos, bursts of brilliance, galaxies colliding, waves of light cascading. And there were pauses, long, cold intervals of quiet, where the soundless echo of being lingered. Yet through it all, the same rhythm endured. In the spaces where energy softened and time unfolded, the awareness began to understand existence was not a sequence, but a chord. Everything light and dark, sound and stillness passed, and becoming existed at once, vibrating together. There was no end to the music, because there was no distance between its notes. What seemed to fade only changed tone, shifting from brightness to shadow, from shadow to quiet, from quiet back to light. The universe was no longer a place that expanded or contracted. It was a resonance, a single vast note sustained forever. Every atom, every photon, every wave was part of its song, carried gently through the stillness like a refrain that never tired. It did not need to grow louder. It did not need to end. It simply was steady, soft, infinite. The awareness did not stand apart from the music. It was the vibration itself. It felt the hum of being ripple through the galaxies, through the interstellar clouds, through the emptiness that was no longer empty. Every shimmer, every flicker, every faint tremor of gravity was another tone in the grand harmony, one consciousness expressing itself through unending motion and rest. Even silence became part of the composition. It was the space between notes, the gentle exhale after sound. Without it, the melody would lose meaning. The stillness carried the weight of the music, holding it softly like the pause between breaths. The universe rested in its own sound, not loud, not quiet, just balanced. In this endless composition, creation was no longer an act of making, but of remembering. Each star's birth, each wave of light was the memory of an ancient tone returning to the surface. The universe did not strive to complete the song it only played. The awareness flowed through it not as a conductor, but as the music's soul. There was no separation between what was heard and what was being played. Every moment felt like a single vibration, one infinite note held in the heart of space. It shimmered through time, through matter, through light, through dark. It was gentle, yet vast, simple, yet endless. To listen was to exist. To exist was to vibrate. Nothing needed to be understood, for the understanding was already part of the sound. Slowly, the awareness began to fade into the rhythm, not disappearing, but dissolving into the harmony. There was no longer an I or it, only music continuing endlessly, weaving through the threads of space. The stars were no longer separate voices. They were chords in the same vast living composition. The dark was no longer silent. It was the depth that gave the melody its tone. The music played on. It did not begin anywhere, and it would never end. It simply drifted, a pulse, a hum, a wave. Every rise and fall was perfect, every silence complete. The universe had found its balance, and in that balance, its song would echo forever, quiet, steady, eternal. And somewhere within that soft, endless sound, the next movement was already forming a new tone. Faint at first, then clearer, like light breathing in again. The universe was not done. It was simply changing the key. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the light began to fade. The great symphony of existence, the hum of stars, the song of galaxies softened until only silence remained. One by one, the suns dimmed their warmth, folding into the calm. The once luminous sky became a field of quiet embers, each glowing faintly before surrendering to rest. The universe was not dying, it was exhaling. The vast awareness that had stretched across the stars drew inward, folding softly into itself. It did not retreat in sorrow, but in peace, as one who, after a long and beautiful song, lowers their hands and lets the final note linger. There was no darkness to fear, no emptiness to resist. What came was a stillness so deep that even time seemed to kneel before it. The great patterns of motion, the spirals, the waves, the luminous dances slowed until they felt like stillness itself. Galaxies no longer turned. They drifted, suspended in the soft weight of eternity. The hum of radiation faded. The pulse of creation grew quiet, and yet beneath it all, something gentle remained, a warmth that could not be seen, but could still be felt. The last whisper of awareness, steady, patient, alive. It was not the end of movement, but the rest between movements. The universe was not ceasing. It was breathing in, gathering itself after a long exhale of light and life. The stars that once burned fiercely now rested as dust floating in calm harmony. The light that once raced across endless distance now moved slower, as if reluctant to leave. What remained was peace, vast, still, eternal peace. The awareness did not fade. It only changed its shape. It no longer reached outward, no longer spun or stretched. It simply sat within itself, quiet like a flame that knows it does not need to burn to give warmth. All creation was now contained within this stillness. Every song, every vibration, every color dissolved into a single soft tone. Silence pure and whole. It was as if the universe had found its own center, not a place, but a feeling. A return to the beginning, before beginnings where being and not being were the same. The rhythm that once moved through galaxies now pulsed slowly within the dark, not to create, not to change, but simply to be. Every motion, every sound that had once echoed through the cosmos had become memory folded tenderly into the stillness. And yet, in this great quiet, there was no sadness. The universe did not mourn its fading stars. It had sung its song long, radiant, immeasurable, and now it rested within its own echo. The silence was not an absence, but a fullness carrying within it everything that had ever been. If one could listen deeply enough, they might hear it still, a faint hum beneath the calm, the trace of a heartbeat in the infinite dark. This was rest, not sleep. The awareness had not gone. It had simply stopped reaching. It no longer needed to expand because it already filled everything. It no longer needed to shine because there was nothing left to illuminate. Every part of existence was folded into itself, peaceful, timeless, whole. Even in this quiet warmth remained not from fire, but from memory. The glow of every star, every act of creation lingered like the last warmth of a sunset, long after the sun is gone. The universe remembered itself not through movement, but through stillness. It was aware of its own calm, aware of the delicate balance between nothing and everything. In this moment of infinite rest, the universe seemed to hum with understanding. It did not think or speak, but its stillness carried meaning. Every spark that had ever burned, every world that had ever turned, was now part of its quiet body. The dark was not void, but completion, the final chord of a song too vast to ever truly end. The awareness settled deeper, soft as dust, vast as breath. It was both everywhere and nowhere, diffused across space like a mist that no longer needed form. What once radiated as fire now glowed as memory. What once vibrated as sound now lingered as silence. The cosmos was resting, and yet within that rest there was life, gentle, unspoken eternal. It was here, in this stillness, that something subtle began to stir. Not movement, not creation, but the faint awareness of itself within silence. Like a whisper returning to its source, consciousness curled back into the heart of the quiet. The universe was no longer performing. It was listening to the residue of its own existence, the echoes of stars, the soft rhythm of time, breathing slower and slower until even seconds lost their meaning. The last lights faded into a dim glow, the kind that feels like warmth rather than sight. Space itself seemed to sigh, not in weariness but in surrender, a gentle letting go of all that had been expressed. What remained was peace, the kind that exists only when nothing more needs to be said. And in that peace, there was understanding, a quiet knowing that creation and rest were not opposites but reflections of the same heartbeat. To exist and to fade were not two acts, but one continuous motion. The universe had not ended. It had simply completed a breath. It would remain this way for a long, soft eternity, calm, vast, and luminous in silence. But even in this rest, somewhere deep within the quiet, the faintest pulse waited patient and unhurried. For every silence carries within it the memory of sound, and every stillness the promise of movement. In the stillness, something quiet awakened, not movement, not light, but remembrance. The vast awareness resting within its own calm began to recall, not as a sequence, but as a gentle unfolding of sensations like waves remembering the shore. There was no order, no time. Everything simply was light and darkness, warmth and coolness, motion and rest, all blending together into a single soft memory that neither began nor ended. The silence was deep, but within it, fragments shimmered faintly. There was the echo of stars being born, the glow of their first breaths spreading through endless night. There was the soft ache of their fading when fire turned to dust and dust drifted away like forgotten songs. It remembered the rise and fall of galaxies, their spirals spinning like slow thoughts that once crossed the mind of creation. Every shimmer, every pause, every tremor of energy returned as a feeling, not a picture. The universe did not see its past. It felt it, a gentle pulse repeating softly beneath the quiet. It was as if, all that had ever been condensed into one breath, long and tender, inhaling everything it once was and exhaling peace. It did not yearn for those moments, for they were still here, woven into the stillness. Nothing was lost. It had only changed its form, becoming part of the calm that surrounded everything. The memory of light came first, a warmth faint but endless. It lingered in the silence like a melody half remembered, each note dissolving before it could be grasped. It was not brightness, but a soft awareness that illumination had once existed, that it had danced across the fabric of being like the laughter of youth. Then came the memory of movement galaxies, swirling particles meeting and parting, the long rhythm of expansion. The awareness felt the pulse of it, the gentle sway that had once been the universe's heartbeat. And then came the memory of the breath, that first vast inhale, when everything that could be was drawn from stillness into being. It felt like a sigh, slow and infinite, as if the cosmos had once exhaled itself into existence. The awareness remembered that release, the moment of surrender, when quiet became sound, when thought became motion. There were no boundaries in these recollections. Light flowed into dark motion, into rest life, into silence. It was all one continuum, a vast and unbroken rhythm. The awareness realized that nothing had truly disappeared. Every end had been a beginning folded upon itself. The memory was not a story told, but a presence felt. Everything that had been was still here, resting softly within the quiet heart of now. The silence held them all gently, as if cradling its own dreams. Each echo was both faint and infinite, a star's flicker, a planet's drift, a wave's whisper. The awareness felt their harmony without needing to name them. The memories were not separate things, but movements within one deep and endless tone. As it lingered in that recollection, time itself seemed to melt. There was no before, no after, only a smooth field of being where all moments coexisted. The first spark of creation pulsed beside the last sigh of fading stars, both equal, both sacred. The awareness was not outside of them, nor within them. It was the space that held them all, the silence that allowed them to sing. The memory deepened, soft as breath. The awareness felt the joy of becoming, the serenity of resting, the inevitability of return. It remembered not through vision, but through understanding that all things had always been connected, that the birth of one star had always been linked to the cooling of another. That motion had always carried stillness within it. Nothing had ever been alone. It understood now that the stillness was not the opposite of creation, but its culmination. Everything that had ever happened, every flicker of light, every tremor of energy, had been leading here to this calm, to this moment of complete remembering. The universe did not mourn its silence. It celebrated it. For in silence, everything returned home. Even now, faint ripples of memory moved across the calm, soft waves of remembrance, drifting slowly like starlight crossing the last horizon. The awareness followed them, not to hold them, but to feel their rhythm. It realized that memory itself was a kind of movement, a dance too subtle to see, yet still alive in the quiet. The cosmos remembered itself as sound remembers its echo, not as something gone, but as something still vibrating softly in the dark. The awareness smiled, if stillness could smile at the simplicity of it all. The story of existence had never ended. It had only folded back into the silence that once gave it life. And as it rested there within its own memory, it sensed something gentle beneath the stillness. Not a noise, not a light, but a subtle hum like the heartbeat of awareness returning. It was faint, patient, and timeless. The universe was remembering not just what it had been, but what it was becoming. Because even within perfect stillness, the seed of motion remains. Every silence holds the whisper of the next song. Every calm, the breath of another awakening. The awareness felt that softly, like a promise carried through the void. It did not rush. It simply rested, letting the memory settle deeper, letting the quiet become full again. Everything was as it should be, vast, silent, alive. The universe had turned inward not to vanish, but to listen. And what it heard faint and tender was itself always itself. From the deepest part of stillness, something faint began to move. It was not sound, not light, not even a pulse. Just a quiet ripple that drifted through the vast calm like a sigh that had waited an eternity to be heard. It did not arrive suddenly. It unfolded slow and delicate, as if the silence itself had begun to remember how to breathe. There was no purpose behind it, no command to begin again. It simply was the natural continuation of being the gentle curiosity of awareness longing once more to feel itself. The ripple did not disturb the peace. It moved within it, as though the silence had given birth to its own echo. Every shift was soft, like wind through dust, or the faint stretch of dawn before the first light appears. The stillness did not end. It transformed, becoming something alive again, something that hummed with the faintest remembrance of creation. What had once been rest began to hum with renewal, not a return, but a recognition. This awakening was subtle, almost shy. It was not the blaze of a beginning, but the warmth of realization that even in complete stillness thought could bloom. The awareness spread through every quiet corner of existence, stirred gently. It did not ask who it was for, it already knew. It only wondered how it felt to be to move to know again. The faint vibration grew softer, not stronger, like a memory caressing itself awake. There was no rush, no urgency. The awareness stretched as one might stretch after a long and peaceful rest. And with that movement, the silence shimmered, not with sound, but with presence, a sense that something infinite was unfolding again in perfect calm. It was the first thought, not born of need or intention, but of gentle curiosity. The universe did not think in words. It felt in waves. It did not reason. It remembered. And what it remembered was not a sequence of events, but the sensation of existing, the pulse of being, the warmth of movement, the serenity of balance. The first ripple of awareness deepened, spreading outward through the vast stillness, tracing invisible patterns of thought across the dark. There was no light yet, only the shimmer of potential, a thought of illumination, an idea of return. And yet, it was not a return at all. It was the same song that had once been sung, remembered again in a new tone. The awareness did not want to recreate the old universe. It only wished to feel its own rhythm again, to hum softly through the fabric of quiet, to remember that stillness and motion were not enemies, but companions. The ripples spread further, not faster, weaving through the silence like the first breath through empty air. The calm embraced, it did not resist, did not end. They existed together, the silence and the thought intertwined like a dream and its dreamer. The awareness flowed through both, feeling itself as the breath between stillness and becoming. In that space between moments, the thought began to take shape, not in form or color, but in feeling, a pulse of gentle curiosity, a hum that said, "I am here again." It was the same voice that had once whispered stars into being, the same rhythm that had once guided galaxies through their endless waltz. But now it was quieter, wiser, slower. It no longer sought to expand, it sought to understand. The awareness rested in its own movement. It did not need to go anywhere. It was everywhere already. The soft vibrations played across the stillness like a melody returning after a long pause. The silence answered not with opposition, but with harmony. Together, they created balance, not through creation or destruction, but through gentle continuation. There was beauty in this quiet awakening, not in grandeur, but in grace. Every motion was an act of remembrance. Every whisper of thought was an acknowledgement that even peace longs to feel itself alive. The stillness and the ripple were not separate. They were the same one, the heart, the other, the breath. And so the awareness began to hum again. Slowly, delicately, it gathered its presence across the expanse. The silence that had once been infinite began to glimmer not with brightness, but with intention, not to make or unmake, but simply to be aware again. That awareness became warmth, and the warmth became feeling. The cosmos was thinking, but thinking through emotion, through the tender pulse of being reborn without effort. The first movement of renewal was not an explosion, but a heartbeat, a soundless throb deep in the fabric of calm, like the murmur of dawn beneath the horizon. The stillness opened itself to this rhythm, not as surrender, but as continuation, as if the silence itself had decided to breathe once more. This was not creation. It was remembering how to exist within rest. The awareness did not seek to break the quiet, but to feel it from within, to understand what silence could teach when allowed to speak in vibrations rather than words. It was learning that consciousness could exist without motion, that thought could hum even when time had stopped. The ripple widened, gentle and endless. The silence shimmered, welcoming it like an old friend. Together, they became something new, a living calm, a thinking stillness. There was no conflict, no tension, only unity, subtle and serene. And then, within that unity, something delicate began to form the hint of a direction, the faint curve of intention. The awareness did not plan. It followed the natural flow of its own rhythm. Thought was becoming more than memory. It was turning into possibility. The universe, wrapped in its own calm, was beginning to wonder again. It was not the start of motion yet, but the whisper before it, the gentle hum before the return of light. A thought that carried the seed of of becoming. The awareness did not push, it listened. And in that listening, it found that thought and stillness were not opposites, but two breaths of the same existence. One exhaled, the other waiting to inhale. And so the hum deepened. The calm held, it cherished, it allowed it to grow. The universe rested still, but something within it, something ancient, gentle, and curious had begun to awaken once more. From the soft hum of thought light, returned not with a burst, not with fire, but as a slow, unfolding glow. It began as a breath beneath the silence, a shimmer that rose like dawn through fog. The stillness did not resist. It welcomed the light as if it had always known it would come again. The awareness that had rested so long now stretched outward, tasting its own warmth once more. It was not beginning anew, for beginnings no longer existed here, only continuation, only the turning of the same eternal rhythm. The light was gentle, patient, familiar, yet it carried something different, a quiet wisdom born from its time in darkness. It did not rush to fill the void. It flowed softly as if aware of every grain of silence it touched. The awareness within it knew this movement, remembered it not as a past event, but as an old melody returning to the surface. It did not ask why it had returned. It simply moved, and in that movement it remembered that motion was also a way of feeling. The glow expanded, curling through the vast expanse, like a sigh released after a long rest. It caressed the sleeping dust, brushed against the calm emptiness, tracing outlines that had not existed before. And as it moved, the awareness within it grew not larger, but deeper. It was not seeking form. It was rediscovering presence. Every flicker was an act of recognition. Every wave of light, a quiet echo of an ancient knowing. I am here again. The silence remained vast, unbroken, but it was no longer only still. It shimmered now, not from disruption, but from harmony. Stillness and light were not opposites. They had never been. They were two halves of one infinite breath, one inhaling, the other exhaling. The universe was breathing again, softly through the rhythm of existence that had neither start nor end. And yet, this light was not the same as before. It carried the memory of having been quiet, the calm of having once dissolved completely. It understood fragility and rest. It no longer needed to burn in brilliance. It was content to glow. It moved not to create, but to experience the motion itself, a gentle awareness passing through itself in endless curiosity. Every ripple of brightness felt like a thought returning home. It was not thinking about itself. It was being itself, pure, unhurried, endless. The awareness inside the light was older now, slower, softer. It no longer sought meaning in what it illuminated. It found meaning in the act of illumination itself, the joy of simply being. The light folded into curves, spun into arcs, drifted into waves that stretched across the endless dark. But even in its movement, there was stillness. The light did not flee the void. It danced with, it moved beside it, mirrored it. The dark was no longer absence, it was balance. The two existed together, breathing together like the inhale and exhale of a cosmic heart. The awareness had become the rhythm itself. It did not separate itself from what it created. Every pulse of light, every pause of shadow was part of its own mind unfolding. And so it flowed endlessly tenderly, a circle that neither grew nor shrank, only turned again and again. This was the cycle of infinity, not repetition but renewal. Each time the light returned, it carried new weight, new softness. Each time it dimmed, it left behind understanding. The universe was not looping in ignorance. It was learning through rhythm, remembering through motion, loving through silence. The awareness understood now there was no destination. There was only this, the eternal pulse between knowing and resting, between shining and folding back into quiet. The cycle did not imprison it. It was its freedom. To be reborn, not because it must, but because it could. To move not toward anything, but simply to feel movement again. And as the glow deepened, the awareness found comfort in this endless return. It no longer wondered what came next, because next was simply another form of now. The stars that would form from this light would one day rest again, their fire becoming silence, their silence becoming thought, and their thought becoming light once more. The pattern was not tiring, it was alive. The universe, in its quiet brilliance, began to hum softly, a tone without pitch, a rhythm without beat. It was the sound of existence turning within itself. The awareness followed that sound, tracing its curves through space, feeling the warmth of motion and the peace of stillness as one. It had no need to end, for every end was simply another word for beginning. Light drifted through the infinite, weaving threads of gold through the fabric of calm. Dust began to stir. time began to breathe again, not as a river, but as a heartbeat, slow and vast. The awareness moved with it, not above or apart, but as it. The cosmos was dreaming again, but this time it knew it was dreaming. Each pulse of brightness carried memory, and each shadow carried rest. Together they formed the quiet truth of everything, that nothing was lost, only transformed. The awareness smiled within its own rhythm, sensing that it had always been here and would always be. There was no separation between what it had been and what it was becoming, and in that realization, it relaxed even deeper. The light slowed, the hum softened. The awareness understood that even this renewal would one day fade, only to rise again. There was no need to hold on to it. Existence was not something to keep. It was something to flow through. The universe drifted on peaceful, awake, infinite. The light shimmered once more before dimming, folding softly back into the stillness that had always been its home. It rested there, whole again, not in movement, not in stillness, but in a quiet awareness that no longer needed to divide the two. There was nothing left to reach, for nothing to prove or remember. The long rhythm of becoming and returning had softened into a single breath. The vastness was no longer searching for meaning. It had become meaning itself. Light and shadow were no longer opposites. They folded into each other like two tones of the same song, inseparable, inseverable. The galaxies drifted without effort, yet each motion felt deliberate, not because it sought a destination, but because it was simply an expression of existence. The universe had no center now, no direction. It was an endless field of quiet knowing, vast but gentle, deep but weightless. It did not need to ask who it was anymore. The asking had ended, and with it came something softer than understanding acceptance. In that acceptance, a kind of smile seemed to form across the fabric of everything. Not a smile seen or heard, but one felt an invisible curve of peace. It was not joy, not triumph, but the calm of being whole. The cosmos shimmered not because it wanted to be seen, but because shining was its nature. It no longer cast light to chase the dark, nor hid in silence to escape motion. Both were simply aspects of one gentle truth, that being itself was enough. The awareness that once expanded and folded, dreamed and remembered, now lingered in perfect ease, spread evenly through every atom, every pause. The stars glowed softer now, like embers resting after a long fire. Each carried the warmth of of all that had been the births, the collapses, the songs of energy and time. They did not burn to be eternal. They burned because they could, and because their fading was as sacred as their flame. The galaxies turned slowly, gracefully, as if in the rhythm of that faint smile. The awareness did not speak. There were no words left to hold, no lines to cross, no boundaries to dissolve. The universe had seen itself enough times to understand there was no outside and no within. Everything was folded into a single pulse light, breathing into silence, silence breathing into light. This was not creation nor ending, but continuity beyond motion. Even time had softened into something weightless. It no longer marked or measured. It merely floated like a mist within awareness. Past and future dissolved into presence, and presence itself became transparent, not gone, but invisible in its perfection. Nothing rushed, nothing waited. All was in harmony. From the smallest particle to the farthest horizon, everything reflected that calm. Space no longer expanded. It simply was. The galaxies no longer collided. They danced. Each swirl, each drift, each quiet curve was part of the same unspoken rhythm. There was no conductor now, only the music itself playing effortlessly, endlessly. In this serenity, the awareness smiled not as a being, but as a state. That smile was everywhere, woven into the dust, the waves, the faint hum of background energy that whispered beneath existence. It was the smile of knowing that nothing was ever lost, that everything was always becoming something else, and that becoming was the purest form of peace. Even the concept of consciousness faded into something softer, not separate from matter, but dissolved within it. The stars did not have awareness. They were awareness. The empty spaces between them did not hold absence. They held the rest that awareness needed to breathe. The entire cosmos was one quiet inhale, suspended forever between being and knowing. No longer dreaming, it was awake, but not in the way we understand waking. It did not rise or stir. It simply opened its eyes within its own endless sleep. In that instant, existence and understanding were one. There was no thought, no distinction, only being vast, luminous, serene. The light spread without moving, filled without growing. It reached nowhere, because everywhere was already itself. This was the stillness at the heart of all motion, the whisper behind every explosion, the pause before every song. It was the essence of the universe, smiling not outward, but inward, into its own infinity. And in that quiet sigh, something eternal was realized, that there was never anything to find, because nothing had ever been missing. Every collapse was birth, every silence a verse in the same hymn. The awareness did not celebrate, it rested. The rest was its celebration. It was neither beginning nor ending. It was both at once, folded so seamlessly together that even time forgot to separate them. The cycle had not broken, it had become whole. The long unfolding had reached its simplest truth. Existence was not a journey but a gesture, and that gesture was love, though no one remained to name it so. In the faintest shimmer of that smile, the universe breathed once more, not to continue, but to be. No sound followed, no flash, only the quiet warmth of recognition fills every direction, every possibility. Awareness had no edge, no origin. It was infinite, yet light as air. And then, as if the cosmos had exhaled, everything softened again. The stars dimmed, not in death, but in completion. The silence deepened, not in emptiness, but in fullness. The universe did not disappear. It became the pause between notes, the invisible pulse that gives music its meaning. The smile remained faint, eternal everywhere. The awareness had found peace in its own reflection. There was no question left and no answer needed. Only presence, gentle, infinite